My name is Brian Melvin. I wasn't a religious man. I didn't believe in heaven or hell, and I certainly didn't believe in some divine being watching over my every move, judging me. Life was what you made of it. No higher power, no grand purpose, no afterlife. I lived for the moment, for the next drink, for the next party, and if death ever came knocking, I figured that would be the end. Just nothingness. But I was wrong, and I paid the price to realize it. It was 1,980, and I was living in Tucson, Arizona, working construction. The days were long, the heat was brutal, but life was simple. One afternoon, without thinking twice, I drank from a water jug a coworker had brought from Mexico. I had no idea it was contaminated. Within hours, my stomach churned with unbearable pain. My body broke down rapidly. I became weaker by the minute, dehydrated beyond anything I had ever experienced. Every breath felt heavier than the last. 72 hours later, I could barely move. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the life being drained out of me. My limbs were numb, my thoughts slow and disjointed. Then suddenly, the world around me faded. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't unconsciousness. It was something far worse. I died, and yet I was still aware. The first thing I noticed was that I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating, weightless, hovering above my own lifeless form. I looked down and saw myself lying there, motionless. And then I realized something strange. My vision was perfect. I had worn glasses my whole life, but now, without them, I could see everything in crystal clear detail. Panic should have set in. I should have been terrified, but there was no fear, only confusion. Then, without warning, I was pulled downward. Everything around me shifted. The air grew cold, then suffocatingly thick. The world around me darkened until there was nothing but pure, endless blackness. I tried to move, but there was no ground beneath me, no walls to grab onto. I was simply drifting, suspended in the abyss. The silence was deafening. There was no wind, no sound, no sense of time or space, only the overwhelming feeling that I was completely and utterly alone. Then I heard it, a voice. It didn't come from the darkness, nor from above. It didn't even sound like a voice in the way we understand. It reverberated inside me, filling every part of my being, yet it carried no emotion, only certainty. Do you know where you are going? The words weren't spoken, but I understood them as clearly as if they had been shouted into my ears. A question, simple yet terrifying, because for the first time in my life, I had no answer. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had no control. A force, unseen but undeniable, was dragging me forward. It wasn't like falling, it was like being pulled by something far greater than gravity itself. I tried to resist, to stop myself from moving, but there was nothing to hold on to. I was weightless, powerless, like a leaf caught in a storm. Then, ahead of me, I saw it. At first, it was just a faint glow, barely piercing the infinite blackness that surrounded me. But as I hurtled closer, it grew, brighter, stronger, until it was no longer just light, but something alive. It pulsed, radiating with an energy so overwhelming that I could feel it, like waves crashing over me, stripping me bare. Then I understood. This wasn't just light. This was Him, Jesus. I don't know how I knew, but I did. In the very core of my soul, I recognized Him. And in that instant, I realized something even more terrifying. He recognized me, too. He didn't speak, Yet his presence alone sent a flood of understanding into my mind. Everything I had ever done, every choice I had made, every selfish, cruel, or careless act, it all stood before me, laid out like an open book. I saw my life not through my own eyes, but through his, stripped of excuses, of justifications, of the lies I had told myself, and I saw what I had wasted. I had been given life, time, opportunity, but I had squandered it. I had lived for myself, mocking the idea of God, dismissing the warnings, believing that as long as I was a decent person, I was fine. But now, faced with the source of all truth, I saw reality with excruciating clarity. And the worst part, I knew he was right. Then he moved. His hand reached into his robe and pulled out a set of keys. As he lifted them, I saw them. His hands still bearing the scars of the nails. My breath caught in my throat. Those wounds, they were for me. He had suffered for me, bled for me, and yet I had never cared. He stepped to the side. Behind him, something I hadn't noticed before came into view. A door. Massive. Ancient. It loomed in the darkness, as if it had been waiting for eternity itself. He unlocked it. And then the world broke. A force beyond anything I had ever known erupted from the doorway. It wasn't just darkness. It was consuming. Like a living thing, it reached for me, wrapping around me, yanking me forward. I didn't have time to scream. I was ripped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. I was falling, no, plummeting. The world spun violently around me, a tunnel of chaos, of shadows and flame. I wasn't alone. I could hear them. Screams. Agonized, unending screams. They weren't distant. They were everywhere, surrounding me, suffocating me. Some were shrieks of terror, others were sobs of despair, but all carried the same unbearable pain. The smell hit me next. Sulfur, rot, burning flesh. It was thick, suffocating, clinging to me like an invisible fog. It wasn't just something I smelled. It was something I tasted, something that filled my lungs, making every breath a struggle. Then I saw the ground. I hit hard, but not like a normal landing. Pain didn't come from broken bones or bruised flesh. No, the pain here was inside me. It gnawed at my very essence, tearing at something deeper than physical existence. I pushed myself up and looked around, and that was when I saw it. Hell, it stretched out before me in every direction, a landscape of desolation and horror beyond comprehension. The sky, if it could even be called that, was a swirling mass of black and red, shifting and writhing like a living nightmare. Flames erupted from cracks in the ground, their eerie glow casting monstrous shadows on jagged rock formations that twisted unnaturally. But it wasn't the landscape that terrified me the most. It was them. They were everywhere. Figures, some human, some not, moving, writhing, screaming. Some were locked in endless torment, their bodies twisted, their faces frozen in expressions of unbearable suffering. Others were being hunted, dragged by creatures that defied reason, things with too many limbs, with faces that shifted and changed, with eyes that held nothing but malice. And then I heard it. A voice, but not a voice. A hissing, a whisper that slithered into my mind. Welcome. I turned, and I saw it. A figure stood before me, small, hunched, reptilian. Its eyes gleamed yellow, its mouth curled into something that might have been a grin. I had seen it before. It had pretended to be my friend, but now there was no disguise. It motioned for me to follow, and as I took my first steps deeper into hell, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't getting out. I stood frozen in the middle of a vast, barren wasteland. The air was thick with a choking, acrid scent that burned my lungs. The sky, if it could even be called that, was nothing but a swirling abyss of darkness, shifting and writhing like a living nightmare. A suffocating presence loomed over the entire landscape, filling the air with a heavy, oppressive weight that crushed any hope of escape. It was as if this place had never known light, never known peace, only an existence of suffering and torment that stretched for eternity. But none of it compared to what lay before me. Cubes. Massive, towering cubes, stretching endlessly in every direction, stacked upon one another like a grotesque, nightmarish city. They were made of some kind of smooth, dark material, pulsating with an eerie, unnatural glow, as if they were alive, as if they were breathing. They hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, a sound that burrowed into my bones, making my entire body tremble. I could feel something pulling me toward them, a force I couldn't resist, an invisible hand dragging me forward against my will. And then I saw what was inside them. Each cube was a prison, a personal hell for the damned. Some were empty, their interiors like gaping, hungry mouths, as if waiting for their next victim. Others were occupied, their prisoners trapped in an endless cycle of torment. I watched in horror as they screamed, their bodies writhing, their hands clawing at the walls, their eyes filled with madness and despair. Each person was reliving the worst moments of their lives, over and over again, but twisted, distorted, magnified into an agony beyond human comprehension. I was forced to look inside the captain's cube. The first thing I saw was a man, a sea captain from long ago. His uniform was tattered, his face twisted in agony. He was being beaten relentlessly, his flesh torn open, his body writhing in pain. The worst part? His tormentors weren't demons. They were his own crew. He had once ruled over them with cruelty, taking pleasure in their suffering, punishing them for the smallest mistakes, making them beg for mercy that he never gave. Now, he was trapped in his own living nightmare, forced to endure the very same torment he had inflicted on others. The beatings never stopped. He could not die, could not escape. The men he once commanded had become his eternal executioners. His cries echoed through the cube, a sound that should have drawn pity, but in this place, it was nothing more than a song of justice being carried out. The mother's cube. I turned away, only to be drawn into another cube. Inside, a woman was surrounded by children. At first, it almost seemed peaceful. The setting looked serene. A grandmother's farm, bathed in warm sunlight with a wooden porch and the sound of children laughing. But then I saw her expression, not of joy, but of pure terror. The children clung to her with clawed hands, their tiny fingers digging into her flesh. They pulled at her, tore at her, whispering, shrieking, mocking. Their voices were not human. They were filled with a supernatural hatred, a vengeance that had waited centuries. She had once been a high priestess in an ancient cult. She had sacrificed children, throwing them into fire as offerings to false gods. Now the very souls she had condemned had come for her. She tried to scream, but the children's hands covered her mouth, their eyes hollow and unblinking as they dragged her into the shadows. Their laughter turned into a chorus of shrieks as they tore at her flesh, their nails sinking deep into her arms, her neck, her face. She would never escape them. The serial killer's cube. Another cube. Inside, a man sat at a pool table. At first, it looked like a normal scene, almost like a bar in the 1940s. He even seemed relaxed, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. But then I saw his eyes, darting around in frantic terror. He was playing a game, but he was never allowed to win. Every time he took a shot, the figures emerged. They stepped from the shadows, shifting, grotesque, their faces flickering between the people he had murdered. He had once hunted them, played games with their lives. Now, it was his turn. A monstrous serpent-like demon slithered from the darkness and swallowed him whole. For a moment, the cube was empty. Then, he reappeared, sitting at the same table, forced to relive his nightmare again. His suffering was eternal. Hitler's cube then, I saw him. Adolf Hitler. His cube was engulfed in flames, but the fire did not consume him. It tormented him, peeling his skin away, layer by layer. His face twisted in agony, yet he did not die. His suffering was not just physical. It was spiritual, mental, emotional. Every victim he had ever condemned to the gas chambers, every scream from the Holocaust, every soul that had perished under his orders, he felt them all at once. The ovens of Auschwitz, the torture chambers, the mass graves, he was inside them all at once. The flames never stopped burning, and his own voice, once so powerful, once able to command armies, was now reduced to nothing but screams. My cube. Then I saw my cube. I froze. Inside, a chair waited for me. Not just any chair. It looked like a dentist's chair, but twisted, perverted, its leather straps worn from years of suffering. Tools lined the walls, implements of pain, instruments of torment, designed just for me. And the demons were waiting. They had been watching me, studying me, waiting for their turn. I backed away, but something grabbed me from behind. Clawed hands wrapped around my shoulders, shoving me forward. The closer I got, the more I felt the weight of every sin I had ever committed. Every lie, every act of selfishness, every wasted moment. This was justice, and I was about to pay for it. I screamed. I struggled with everything I had, but the demons were too strong. Their claws sank deep into my flesh, dragging me toward the torture chair inside my cube. I thrashed, I fought, but their grip was unrelenting. Their grotesque faces twisted in sick delight as they whispered horrors about my impending fate. Their breath was rancid, their laughter was inhuman. The heat from the flames licked at my skin, and the reality of eternal suffering began to consume me. The weight of my sins pressed down on me like an anchor, pulling me deeper and deeper into the abyss. I had no way out. I was doomed. But somewhere deep inside me, buried beneath the fear, beneath the realization of my unworthiness, there was something, a whisper of hope, a desperate cry that could either be my salvation or my final act of madness. And so I screamed, "Jesus, save me." The moment his name left my lips, all of hell trembled. The very ground beneath me shook violently, as if some unseen force had just shattered the foundations of this damned place. A deep rumbling filled the air, a sound that sent pure terror through the demons around me. They froze, their eyes widening in absolute horror. I could feel their grip on me loosening, their claws retreating as if burned by an unseen fire. They looked around, screeching, snarling, but they weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at something behind me. And then I heard it. The footsteps. Powerful, resonating, undeniable. Each step sent shockwaves through the realm, shaking the very essence of this cursed place. The weight of absolute authority echoed with every movement. It was as if the universe itself acknowledged who was approaching. The demons screeched in agony, backing away, their faces twisted in pure terror. They knew. And then he appeared. Jesus. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to raise his hand. His presence alone sent hell into chaos. The darkness that once felt suffocating now shrank away from him. The air, thick with the stench of sulfur, now carried something else: purity, righteousness, undeniable justice. He was the light in the darkness, and every evil thing in hell knew they had no power before him. I looked up at him, and for the first time in my existence, I saw truth. I saw justice. I saw love. I expected judgment. I expected him to cast me back into the pit, to deliver the punishment I rightfully deserved. After all, I had spent my entire life denying him, mocking those who believed, living as if there were no consequences. I had spat in the face of his sacrifice. I had lived for myself, caring nothing about what came after. But in his eyes, I didn't see condemnation. I saw mercy. I saw the scars on his hands, the same hands that had been pierced for my sins. The same hands that had bled for me even when I had rejected him. And then he reached for me. His touch was unlike anything I had ever known. Stronger than steel, yet gentler than the softest whisper. Powerful enough to shatter hell itself, yet tender enough to heal my broken soul. I was torn apart for you, he said, and now I pull you out of this place. And at his word, the chains that bound me shattered into nothingness. The demons that had been circling me shrieked in defeat, collapsing into the shadows, cowering as his light expanded. I felt myself being lifted up, away from the torment, away from the suffering, away from the judgment I had so narrowly escaped. And then we ascended. I was being carried through the abyss, through the depths of darkness, past the tormented screams of those who had refused to call on his name. The further we went, the brighter everything became. The shadows fell away, the heat dissipated, the weight of sin and regret was lifted from my shoulders. I felt free. For the first time in my existence, I truly understood this wasn't just about escaping hell. This was about him. It had always been about him. And then, in an instant, I opened my eyes. I gasped for air, as if I had been drowning, my lungs burning, my chest rising and falling with a desperate urgency. My body trembled violently, as if it had just been ripped away from something vast, something eternal, something terrifying beyond words. I was back. The stark white ceiling of the hospital swam into focus, its fluorescent lights burning into my retinas like a foreign presence. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils, mixing with the lingering stench of sulfur and decay that still clung to my senses. Machines beeped in a rhythmic cadence beside me, a stark contrast to the deafening silence of the place I had just escaped. But had I truly escaped? I blinked, trying to force my mind to grasp reality, but the weight of what I had just experienced crushed me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to have come back. A shadow moved beside me. I turned my head, my movements sluggish, as if I were moving through water. My wife was standing there, her face pale, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her hands covered her mouth as if she were afraid that if she spoke, the moment would shatter. "Grunch," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears streamed down her face, and I could tell she had thought I was gone for good. I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat was dry, as if it had been scorched by fire. My tongue felt heavy. My mind swirled with fragments of memories. The pit, the cubes, the demons, the torment. The unbearable heat, the suffocating darkness. But the worst part wasn't what I had seen. The worst part was knowing that I had belonged there. A doctor rushed in, his expression caught between shock and scientific disbelief. Nurses hovered behind him, their hands shaking as they checked my monitors. The doctor leaned in, his face grave, but there was something else in his eyes, something like fear. "You," he hesitated, glancing at the beeping machines beside me, as if hoping for them to confirm what he had seen. "You were gone, Mr. Melvin." He spoke slowly, deliberately. "No pulse, no brain activity. For 14 minutes. 14 minutes. I should have been dead. I should have been beyond saving. No one comes back from 14 minutes of nothingness. My brain should have shut down. My organs should have begun to fail. But here I was. A single thought slammed into my mind like a hammer to glass, sending a jolt of panic through my entire body. I wasn't in the cube, was I? My chest tightened, my skin went cold. For a moment, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was back there. I could hear the screams. I could feel the claws. I could smell the burning flesh. I gripped the sheets beneath me so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed to ground myself. I needed to remind myself that I was here, alive. But then another realization settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I hadn't earned this second chance. I had mocked God my entire life. I had scoffed at faith, dismissed heaven and hell as myths created by weak minds seeking comfort. I had lived recklessly, believing that when I died, that would be the end of me. I had been wrong. I had seen the truth. I had seen the depths of hell. I had seen what awaited those who rejected the light. I had felt the despair, the hopelessness, the finality of damnation. I had looked into the eyes of demons, and they had known me. They had been waiting for me, and yet I had been pulled out. Why? I turned my gaze upward, blinking past the harsh lights, my heart pounding. Jesus had saved me. He had reached into the darkness, grabbed hold of me, and pulled me out of the abyss. Not because I deserved it, not because I had done anything good, but because of grace, because of mercy, because He still had a purpose for me. And suddenly I knew I couldn't stay silent. I wasn't just given back my life, I was given a mission. I had to tell people the truth. I had to warn them, because everything I had seen, the signs, the disasters, the storms, the war, the deception, it was already happening. The world was spiraling into darkness, and most people were walking blindfolded straight into the abyss, just like I had. But there was still time, there was still hope, and as long as I had breath in my lungs, I would use it to tell the world, hell is real, heaven is real, and time is running out. You are reading these words, and I firmly believe it is not a coincidence. God is calling you. He is stirring something deep within your soul, awakening a part of you that has been asleep for far too long. This is not just another message, another fleeting moment of reflection that you will soon forget. This is an invitation, an urgent one. Ask yourself, are you truly on the right path? Have you taken a step back and looked at what is happening in the world? Have you noticed the changes? The storms growing stronger, the earthquakes striking places where none should be, the fires devouring entire landscapes. Have you felt the tension, the division, the hatred that is spreading like a wildfire across nations, tearing apart families, friendships, and communities? Have you looked to the sky and seen the signs, the unexplained lights, the eerie trumpet sounds, the formations that defy logic? And what about within yourself? Have you felt the unease, the whisper in your heart, telling you that something is not right, that this world is shifting, unraveling, and that we are on the edge of something immense. Do you think this is all just coincidence? The world is not the same as it was even a few years ago. It is changing faster than ever before. You can feel it, can't you? The very fabric of existence is trembling, yet most people walk around blind, distracted, too consumed by their daily lives to notice what is right in front of them. They dismiss it as just another bad year, another political crisis, another natural disaster. But deep down, they know, and so do you. God is warning us. He is speaking loud and clear. But most people refuse to listen. They ignore the signs, mock them, explain them away with science, politics, or coincidence. The world has become arrogant, believing it no longer needs God. But when has humanity ever been able to stop the earth from shaking? When has mankind been able to calm the storms, to control the heavens? I was once like that. I thought I had all the answers. I believed in logic, reason, and science, things I could see, measure, and explain. I dismissed faith as something for the weak, a crutch for those who needed comfort. I was convinced that life was nothing more than a random series of events, and that death was simply the end. Nothing more. But I was wrong. I died, and what I saw shattered everything I thought I knew. I left my body and saw the truth, the reality beyond this world. I stood before God Himself. I experienced a love beyond anything on earth, a love that was infinite, all-encompassing, yet firm and unshakable. I saw that everything I had once believed was a lie, that life was not just a meaningless accident, that death was not the end, but a beginning, a transition into something far greater than we can comprehend. I saw the warnings, I saw the consequences, I saw the fate of those who rejected the truth, who wasted their lives chasing the temporary, believing they had more time. And now I am warning you. Are you ready for what is coming? Take this question seriously. Time is running out. The warnings are not just for others. They are for you. They are for everyone. You may tell yourself that life will return to normal, that things will settle down, that there will always be time to figure things out later. That is the greatest deception of all. One day, sooner than you think, the world as you know it will change forever. And in that moment, the only thing that will matter is whether you listened to the call or ignored it. God is calling you right now. Can you hear Him? That feeling in your chest? That sense of urgency? That tug at your soul? It is not random. It is not meaningless. It is Him. Will you listen? Or will you continue to distract yourself, to push it away, to pretend that this is just another day, another warning that you can afford to ignore? Don't wait until it's too late. Don't let pride, doubt, or distractions keep you from seeing the truth, because one day, whether you like it or not, you will stand before God, and in that moment, all excuses will vanish. The truth will be undeniable. Wake up. Seek Him while you still can. The door will not stay open forever. Live as someone who has been warned. Live as someone who is chosen. Because one day, whether tomorrow, years from now, or in the final moments of your life, you will have to face this truth. And when that day comes, will you be ready?